Welcome to EDU510, Fundamentals of Research. In this course, we're going to explore the role of educational research and how one can become a successful and ethical researcher. During the course, you will be engaged in many of the activities of a researcher through our assignments, and you'll be able to begin the process of building resources for your own research and the knowledge necessary to become an effective researcher. You will also be collaborating with your forum group members and sharing insights and ideas throughout the course. This will be invaluable to you when you work on your research project at the completion of your program. The primary text that we're going to be using is by John Creswell. He's a professor of educational psychology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He's a very prolific author. He writes primarily about research. He's a researcher on research, and particularly about mixed methods research. His work is particularly helpful in introducing graduate students to the broad concepts and practices that inform social science research. We will be reading other authors too throughout the course. Each of them will lay a useful foundation for your future work at the conclusion of your program and your research work in the future in your schools and school systems. The course is organized into 6 modules, each of which lasts about 2 weeks. As this is a very, very busy course, I would suggest becoming familiar with the key dates list on your e-class so that you're aware of the deadlines well in advance. In fact, I've gone through the key dates and entered them into my electronic calendar so that I have set up warnings for me that some event is coming up so that I can organize my time. And I hope that you'll do the same because I know how busy all of you are. For example, in the first module, you'll be exploring 3 readings, 2 in the primary text, that is Creswell 2015, as well as a chapter from another of Creswell's books, which is posted in eClass in Module 1. So you just have to click the button and you'll have that reading. These chapters provide a very good introduction to the broad outlines of qualitative and quantitative research, as well as mixed methods approaches to research. Your assignment will enable you to explore one of the most important tasks of an excellent researcher, observation. Your instructions for Part A are posted in the syllabus and in the assignment section on eClass, but Part B will not be posted until Part A is completed. We're not trying to be mysterious. You'll see why that's the case when the time comes. So you'll have an opportunity to do Part A, and then you'll get the instructions for Part B later, and I'll let you know when that happens. I guess at the heart of this course is the question, well, what is research? And of course, the second question, how do you do it well? So what do we mean by research? Well, building on Creswell's definition, which you'll find in this module's readings, research is a systematic, and this is, I'm adding to his definition, a systematic, and I've added theoretically informed examination of a particular phenomenon or phenomena in a social context. And I'm adding that little bit extra because each of us in approaching a question comes from a theoretical or a particular epistemological perspective that provides a particular view of a phenomenon or phenomena. You can think of it as kind of lenses. So each theory provides us with a particular kind of lens. So it's kind of like when you go to the optometrist's office and they keep clicking those lenses into place. Each one offers a particular view of whatever phenomenon you're having a look at. One will make something more clear than others will. And Creswell talks about how it is that we make those kinds of choices. And so I just wanted to add that as kind of a precursor to some of the discussions that we'll have further in the course. What I would like to say, however, is that it is not an opinion piece. Research is not a conclusion that is drawn out of what we might call common sense or even previously held knowledge. It may turn out that our research confirms all of these everyday forms of knowledge that we depend on to live our lives, but research offers us an opportunity to look through new lenses, to at something that may be very familiar to us so that we can see it in a new way and we can understand it in a deeper and more complex way. It is knowledge that begins, that is, research is knowledge that begins with an identifiable and carefully considered problem and follows the process of knowledge construction that allows the researcher to report on those findings in a trustworthy way in order to provide an informed response or deeper understanding of that problem that may prompt more knowledgeable action. After all, we do this work so that it will make a difference in addressing the particular problem that we began our process with. So that leads us then to the question, well, why research? Well, from my perspective and the perspective of Creswell and others, research helps us to understand the world in which we live. It may, and this list could go on. These are just some of the things that I've thought of kind of relatively quickly. How is it that this world is organized? How is it that our actions will affect others, and what are the consequences of that? How can we live well, both as individuals, in our smaller collective families, or with others? How can we come to know the other? That is, those who have a different experience of the world. There may be cultural differences, there may be language differences, there may be differences of lived experience that have a significant effect on how we learn to live well with one another. How can we work more efficiently and effectively in the jobs that we work at each day as teachers, as educators, as administrators, whatever our role is in society, as mothers, as fathers, as aunts, uncles, as daughters and sons, and so on? How is it that we can do that work more effectively and perhaps more efficiently? It also helps us in the larger picture in developing policies and forms of governance at the local, at the national, and even at the international level that work well in achieving the common good through social institutions. So really, research can have multiple levels of influence at the micro, the family, the smaller, your classroom, the smaller aspects of community, at the meso level, at schools, at community levels, at city levels, for example, and at the macro level of human activity at larger governmental organizations and NGOs and so on. So research potentially has a significant impact on everything that we engage in our lives. And so as researchers, we can contribute to that process and build that body of knowledge so that all of these effects can be achieved. Creswell talks about how we do research, and he, as when we talked about what is research, he outlines particular processes by which we can achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves. He suggests, first of all, that we identify a research problem and so on. So I'd like to talk about this a little bit in terms of my own master's research. I was working in a First Nations school as a principal at the time that previous to the time that I did my master's research. And the problem that I confronted on a significant number of occasions was this interaction between First Nations and non-First Nations administrators who were attempting to work together. So in my case, I was working in a community outside of London, Ontario, and we were probably about 30 kilometers outside of the city. And so we worked quite closely often with teachers and administrators, particularly administrators in the London system. And so it meant interactions between these two systems. And oftentimes, because of cultural differences, because of organizational differences, because of different kinds of expectations, because of the extra layer at that time of the Department of Indian Affairs and their interactions with us, this became a very complex environment. And so as a result, oftentimes those exchanges and those interactions weren't as effective in getting the job done as certainly I would have liked and the community would have liked. So the research problem seemed to me to be interactions, how can interactions between Native and non-Native or First Nations and non-First Nations administrators, how can we understand that better so that it becomes a more effective environment? So I then reviewed the literature. I looked at a lot of literature on identifying some of the issues in First Nations education. I looked at intercultural interactions, particularly in governmental organizations. I looked at philosophical understandings of working between different cultural norms and belief systems and so on. So I did this significant review of the literature, and I came down to my question, or the purpose for my research, which was, how can we understand understanding between First Nations and non-First Nations administrators? And I was looking at the particular context of Southwestern Ontario and the community in which I was working, although I didn't, of course, identify it for ethical reasons. My data collection then became looking at documents that had been negotiated, any minutes from meetings that I could lay my hands on. I also interviewed senior administrators at the London Board, and I interviewed senior administrators working as First Nations administrators in various systems in Ontario. And so then I, had to bring together all of this information. So I had big binders with all of the interviews that I had conducted and transcribed. I had binders with documents, copies of documents, and so on. And then I had to analyze and interpret the data. And I'm not going to talk about my methods for doing that right now, but I had to come up with a way to make sense of all of that data that I had collected. And once I had done that, then I had to write my report, that is, write my thesis, and then it was evaluated. Because I was a graduate student, it was evaluated by the committee that I was working with. If I were an academic, it would be evaluated by reviewers in journals, by audiences, and those who were organizing forums and so on at conferences. And so there's a whole range of ways in which research is evaluated before I would feel comfortable as a researcher in making it public. So these 6 steps then, although they may be messy, although they may not be as neat as this, although you may start with reviewing the literature, maybe go back to re-identifying the problem, you may specify your purpose, and then in light of something that you read later on, you might have to move back and so on. Although that, it's a lot messier than this may look. These are the 6 steps that one can follow in conducting really excellent research. So Creswell offers this model, a skeleton, if you will, for conducting our research, and it's a helpful one. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in more depth as we go through the course. And so as you look at this and you can begin to imagine the work that you're going to be doing, the adventure begins. And it began when you began your program. It kind of picks up speed in this course. And then, of course, as you move into actually conducting your research, it's going to become a real adventure. So I want to welcome you to 510. I want to give you my best wishes as you embark on this important, very important research journey. And I want to offer myself as a resource, and I know that Christine does as well, as teaching assistant, working on her own research currently. As you kind of work your way through this process and as it raises questions for you, both in terms of the actual action itself that you're exploring, but also in thinking about your research that lies ahead. So all the best, and looking forward to hearing more from you during Module 1 and all the modules that follow.